The campground was nearly empty when I arrived. It was a late Friday afternoon, and most people had packed up and left by now. That was just how I liked it. Quiet. I always preferred camping on the fringes, away from the crowds. I set up my tent near the edge of the woods, a little off the beaten path. The smell of pine and the distant rush of a creek nearby reminded me why I loved being out here so much. I had my supplies: a small stove for cooking, a bag of prepackaged meals, a bottle of whiskey, and a flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to survive a couple of days out here. The weather was perfect, crisp and cool, with the sun dipping below the treeline, casting long shadows across the clearing. As the sun set, the world quieted down, and the forest grew darker. The occasional chirp of a cricket or the rustle of wind in the branches was the only sound that broke the stillness. I made a fire, the crackling flames offering both warmth and light, and began eating my dinner. Nothing fancy, just some beans and rice heated over the stove. The firelight flickered in the growing darkness, and I settled back against a log, sipping my whiskey, enjoying the peace. This was what I came here for: to disconnect, to escape the noise of the city, to be alone with my thoughts. There was a calming rhythm to being out here, a steady beat in the wilderness that was almost soothing. But then there was a noise. It was faint at first, just a slight rustle in the underbrush behind me. My first instinct was to brush it off as an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but the sound grew louder, sharper. It wasn't the gentle rustling of leaves that I was used to hearing. No, this was deliberate, purposeful. Someone or something was moving around out there. I froze. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight I had left by my side. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the sound didn't sit right with me. I had been out here enough times to know that the forest had a way of making you feel like you were being watched. It was the kind of feeling that crept up on you, uninvited, like a chill crawling down your spine. I sat there, listening. The wind had died down, and the usual forest sounds seemed to fade. All I could hear now was the faint rustling in the underbrush. Whoever or whatever it was getting closer. I stood up slowly, trying not to make any noise. My boots crunched lightly against the dry leaves on the forest floor, and I cursed under my breath. It was too loud, too obvious. I was exposed. The last thing I wanted was to give away my position to whatever was out there. I took a cautious step toward the edge of the clearing, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rustling stopped. Complete silence. I waited, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. I scanned the treeline, the flashlight beam sweeping across the dark shapes of trees and underbrush. Nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a curious deer, but deep down, I knew that feeling of being watched, wasn't something an animal could cause. It was something far more unsettling. I was about to lower the flashlight when I heard it again. This time it was closer, much closer. The rustling sounded as if it was directly behind me. I spun around, shining the beam of the flashlight into the dark woods. My pulse quickened as I squinted into the shadows, desperately trying to make out anything moving. There was nothing. The trees stood silent and unmoving. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then there was a sharp snap of a twig, loud enough to make me jump. That's when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something shifted in the darkness. A figure, tall and thin, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam. It was barely visible, blending into the shadows of the trees, but there was no mistaking the shape. It was human, but something about it wasn't right. The way it stood, unnaturally still, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't move, couldn't move. My body was frozen, a primal fear locking me in place. And then, in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, I heard it, just a faint whisper on the wind. "You're not alone." It wasn't loud enough to be clearly heard, but I felt it. The words seeped into my bones, sending a wave of dread through me. I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't imagining it. There was something out there. I quickly turned and ran for my tent, not looking back. My heart thudded in my chest as I fumbled to unzip the flap. I threw myself inside, and for a moment, I just sat there, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest outside was dead silent once again, as if nothing had occurred. But I knew better. I huddled inside my tent, flashlight still in hand, my eyes darting to every shadow outside. The fire was still burning, but it didn't seem like enough anymore. The warmth felt distant, like it couldn't reach me in this state of fear. Hours passed, though it felt like no time at all. I don't know when I finally managed to fall asleep, but I woke up in a panic. The night was still dark, the fire long extinguished, and the campsite felt even emptier than before. Something had changed. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the forest had closed in around me. I stayed inside my tent for as long as I could, but eventually, I had to face the outside world. The silence was deafening. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I stepped outside cautiously, flashlight in hand, scanning the surroundings. The trees seemed closer, their branches hanging lower than they had before. The ground was damp from the early morning dew, and the air felt thick with tension. There was no sign of whatever had been out there last night. No footprints, no broken branches. But I could feel it. Something wasn't right. I quickly packed up my gear, not bothering to make breakfast. My stomach was in knots, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rustling in the woods had stopped, but it felt like it had just moved farther away, waiting. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed my pack and left the campsite behind, walking briskly down the trail that led back to the parking lot. The path felt long and unfamiliar, though I had hiked it 100 times before. The trees loomed over me, their shadows stretching unnaturally in the morning light. It wasn't until I was halfway down the trail that I saw it. An old, abandoned campsite. The tent was torn, the fire pit cold and empty, and there were signs of something having been recently disturbed. The eerie part was that it looked exactly like mine. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. Not just last night, not just this morning. I wasn't alone, and I was never going to be alone again. I quickly turned around and hurried back toward the parking lot. My legs were stiff, my breathing shallow, as if I could outrun whatever had been out there. But the feeling of being watched never left. It stayed with me, growing stronger the further I went. I didn't dare stop to look back. The sound of footsteps, faint but persistent, seemed to follow me through the woods. Every time I quickened my pace, the steps quickened with me. By the time I reached the end of the trail, I could barely breathe. The parking lot was empty, the daylight breaking over the horizon. But when I reached my truck, I noticed something strange. There was a small trail of broken twigs and crushed grass leading toward it. My heart sank. I had made it out of the woods, but somehow I wasn't free. I wasn't free at all. The end. I arrived at the campsite just as the sun began to set behind the hills. It wasn't a popular spot. It was far enough off the main trail that it seemed like no one else bothered to come out here. I liked it that way. The solitude was exactly what I needed. Time to think. To be alone. The city had been wearing on me lately, and the last thing I wanted was to share my weekend with a bunch of other campers. The site was tucked into a narrow valley, surrounded by tall, dense trees. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and roots, and the air felt damp from the morning's rain. A creek ran nearby, its constant gurgling barely audible under the hum of the wind in the trees. As I unpacked my gear, setting up my tent, I noticed how quiet everything felt, almost too quiet. The usual chirps and rustlings of the forest were absent, like the place had gone still, as if the wildlife had sensed something I couldn't. I shrugged it off. It was probably nothing, just the kind of eerie feeling you get when you're in a place that's unfamiliar and your mind starts to play tricks on you. Once my tent was up and my campfire ring cleared, I set about collecting wood for a fire. The crackling flames always helped me settle into the rhythm of camping, and tonight, I needed that sense of calm more than ever. The sun dipped lower, and a chill settled into the air. It felt good to be outside, but there was an underlying tension in the quiet, an odd sense that something was off. I ate a quick meal of freeze-dried pasta, washed it down with a few swigs of water, and settled in by the fire. The light from the flames danced around the clearing, casting long shadows across the trees. I leaned back against a rock, the warmth from the fire seeping into my skin, and closed my eyes for a moment, just listening to the sound of the flames crackling. The wind shifted, and I snapped my eyes open, my heart pounding. For a split second, I thought I heard something moving in the underbrush, just beyond the edge of the firelight. It was so subtle that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I waited, straining my ears, but the sound didn't repeat. I glanced at the tree lean, my stomach tightening. I could feel it now, an unsettling presence, like something was watching me. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. I had been camping enough times to know that your mind plays tricks on you in the dark. The wind rustling the leaves, the occasional creak of a tree in the distance. All those sounds took on a different character when you were out here alone. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and focused on the fire, trying to calm myself. The shadows seemed to lengthen as the last remnants of sunlight disappeared, and the night settled in. Still, there was no sound except for the crackling fire and the wind. The forest was eerily quiet. I got up to check the perimeter of the campsite, my boots crunching lightly on the dry leaves. There was nothing there, no sign of movement. I didn't know what I had been expecting, but I felt a little better as I made my way back to the fire and sat down again. Minutes turned into hours, and I watched the fire burn lower, the glow of the embers now barely visible through the dark. I knew I needed to get some sleep soon, but I wasn't tired, not in the usual sense. My nerves were on edge, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't just the silence or the darkness. There was something else, something deeper. I finally decided to retreat into my tent, hoping the thin walls would offer me some comfort. I zipped up the flap and crawled into my sleeping bag, curling up to try to sleep. The darkness outside felt oppressive, but the warmth from the fire and the safety of the tent should have made me feel secure. I tried to relax, to let go of the tension building in my muscles, but sleep didn't come easily. I don't know how much time passed, but I was eventually jolted awake by a noise. Something loud, something close. A branch snapped, a heavy footstep on the ground outside my tent. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest, my mind racing to process what was happening. The noise came again, closer this time, unmistakable. Someone or something was walking around my camp. It wasn't a small animal. It was too heavy, too deliberate. I barely breathed, too afraid to move. My flashlight was in the corner of the tent, just out of reach, and the idea of fumbling for it in the dark was terrifying. I lay perfectly still, listening to the footsteps. They moved in a slow circle around the perimeter of my camp, pausing every few steps as if something was observing the campsite from the shadows. I heard another snap, followed by what sounded like a breath, heavy, raspy, as though someone was trying not to be heard. I couldn't stay in the tent. It was too exposed, too vulnerable. My hands trembled as I reached for the zipper, but I forced myself to stop. If I opened the flap, whatever was out there would hear me. I had to think. I needed a plan. The footsteps continued. They were slow, deliberate, and they weren't going away. I felt trapped, paralyzed by the fear crawling up my spine. What was it? Who was it? Then, just as quickly as they began, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. My breath came in shallow bursts, my heart pounding so loudly that it almost drowned out the faintest sound. The absence of movement, the stillness, was almost worse than the noise. It felt like something was waiting, watching, just outside my tent. I lay there for what felt like hours, my eyes fixed on the faint outline of the tent's entrance, expecting to see a shadow pass by, expecting some kind of movement. But nothing happened. No more footsteps, no more sounds. Eventually, the quiet became unbearable, and I decided to take a risk. I reached for the flashlight, slowly, quietly, and pressed the button. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and I shone it at the walls of the tent, checking for any sign of movement. There was nothing. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. I had to know what was going on outside. Carefully, I unzipped the flap just enough to slip my head out, just to peek. I didn't dare fully open it, didn't want to expose myself more than necessary. What I saw made my stomach twist. The campsite was exactly as I had left it. The fire was dead, just smoldering ashes. My backpack was still sitting where I had left it, and my camp stove was undisturbed. But just beyond the edge of the clearing, where the trees met the darkness, I saw something. A shadow. It was tall, unnaturally tall, standing perfectly still among the trees, so still that it could have been mistaken for part of the forest itself. But it wasn't. It was a figure, human-shaped, but the way it stood, unnaturally rigid, like it was waiting for something, sent a wave of ice through me. I couldn't see any features. It was too far, too dark, but I could feel its presence, like it was staring directly at me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. The figure didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It simply stood there, blending with the darkness, watching. I had no idea how long I sat there, frozen, barely able to breathe. My mind screamed at me to do something, to grab my gear, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I didn't know if it was a person, an animal, or something else entirely, but I knew I couldn't stay out there. I needed to get out. I quietly zipped the tent shut and grabbed my pack. The weight of the bag felt like it was holding me back, but I didn't care. I wasn't staying here, not with whatever was out there. I gathered up my things in a frantic hurry, trying to make as little noise as possible. The fear of being caught, of whatever was watching me getting closer, pushed me to move faster than I ever had before. I didn't take the time to carefully pack things away. I stuffed everything into my bag and stumbled out of the tent. I didn't look back at the trees, but I could feel the weight of the figure's presence following me. Every step like it was just behind me. I ran through the dark forest, the ground uneven beneath my feet, branches scratching at my face, but I didn't stop. I didn't care about the pain or the exhaustion. I just needed to get away. I didn't look behind me, couldn't. When I finally reached the parking lot, my heart still racing, my chest tight from the cold air and the panic, I didn't stop. I didn't even take a second to look back at the trail, at the forest that I had just fled from. I just threw my pack in the trunk and got in the car, slamming the door behind me. I didn't stop driving until I was far, far away. I didn't know what had been out there. I didn't know if it was a person, a wild animal, or something else entirely. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it had been waiting for me. And I don't think I'll ever go back to that campsite again. I hadn't been camping alone in years. Not since I was in my 20s. But things had gotten heavy back home. Work stress, noise, the city starting to close in on me, and I just needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere green and empty and slow. I picked a state forest about 5 hours from home. Not too touristy, but safe enough. I packed light but brought the essentials. Food, water filter, emergency kit, knife, flashlight, extra batteries, bear spray, sleeping bag, and a small one-person tent. I planned to be out there 3 nights, no cell service, no one else around. That's how I wanted it. I hiked in a few miles the first afternoon, enough to get off the main trail but not so deep that I couldn't find my way back. I found a flat, shaded area next to a creek, just far enough from the water not to attract animals. I set up camp, made a small fire, cooked a simple dinner, and just sat there for a long while listening to the wind in the trees. Felt good. I hadn't realized how much noise I carried inside until it started to drain out in that silence. The first night passed uneventfully. I slept surprisingly well. In the morning, I boiled some coffee and ate a few protein bars, then wandered down along the creek, mostly just taking it in. The woods were quiet except for the birds and the occasional rustle of something small in the brush. I saw a few deer, watched a heron fly low over the water, and even spotted bear tracks in some soft mud, though they looked old. Felt wild out there, but not threatening. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, I'd circled back to my camp and was going through my food bag when I heard branches snapping to the west. It wasn't the kind of noise a squirrel or deer makes. This was steady, heavy footfalls. I stayed still. The steps kept coming, slow and deliberate. Then I saw him. He stepped out from the trees like he'd been watching me for a while. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, I'd guess. Wore jeans, boots, and a plain dark shirt. His backpack looked well used, but he didn't have a bedroll or any visible gear. He didn't look like a long-distance hiker. His face was tanned, thin, and something about his eyes set me off immediately. Something empty in them, flat and too steady. He didn't smile or wave or call out. He just looked at me like he already knew I'd be here. I nodded once, more out of reflex than friendliness, then turned back to my gear like I had better things to do. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to give him a reason to hang around. I figured if he was just passing through, he'd move on. But he didn't. He hung there at the edge of the trees for another few seconds, just watching. Then he walked toward my camp. I stepped to the side of my tent, putting the fire ring between us. I didn't say a word. I wanted him to feel like I wasn't open to interaction. I kept my posture casual but alert, hands near my knife clipped to my belt. He stopped maybe 10 feet from my tent and looked around like he was sizing things up. No small talk, no wave, just standing there like he had a right to be that close. He glanced at my pack, my fire, my food bag. His eyes kept drifting back to me, but not in a way that felt normal. It wasn't curiosity. It felt like he was assessing me. Finally, he muttered something I didn't quite hear and wandered off the way he came. Didn't look back, didn't pick up his pace, just disappeared back into the brush like it was his backyard. I stood there a long time after that. I didn't move until I was sure I couldn't hear him anymore. I scanned the trees, listening hard, then packed up everything as fast as I could. I didn't like it. I didn't like the way he looked at me, like I wasn't a person, just an object or an opportunity. I should have trusted that gut feeling even more than I did. But I didn't leave. I just moved camp about a mile upstream, deeper into the trees, where the brush was thicker and the trail less obvious. I set up again in a spot that gave me better visibility. I slept lightly that night, every sound pulling me half awake. I kept the knife in my sleeping bag and the bear spray next to my head. Nothing happened, but I didn't feel right. The forest didn't feel like mine anymore. The next morning, I made coffee, then decided I'd hike further into the woods for the day. I didn't want to pack up again just yet. I was tired and sore, but I also didn't want to just sit around waiting to see if he came back. I moved quietly, covered my trail a little, and marked my route mentally so I could find my way back. I kept listening for footsteps behind me, but the forest stayed quiet. By late afternoon, I turned back toward camp. I took a longer, wider loop, approaching from a different angle. I stopped about 50 yards out, crouched behind a thick tree trunk, and scanned the clearing. Something felt wrong. I waited a full 10 minutes just watching. No movement, no sound. Finally, I crept forward. That's when I saw it. There were fresh footprints in the soft soil near my tent. Not mine. Bigger, heavier. They circled the tent, stopped at my fire pit, then led back into the woods. I checked my stuff. My food was untouched, but my pack had been unzipped. Nothing taken, just opened. Like someone had rummaged through it slowly and put things back exactly where they were. That was worse somehow. More intentional. He'd come back. I packed up everything. Every single item. No dinner. No rest. I hiked out fast. Didn't stop to drink water or check my phone when I got signal. I moved until my legs were shaking, until it was almost dark. Then I found a spot just off the trail, a few hundred yards from a ranger-maintained gravel road. I didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I just lay in my sleeping bag with my knife and bear spray in my hands and waited for morning. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't hear anything either. When the sun came up, I walked the remaining couple of miles back to my car. I passed one couple with a dog near the parking lot, and I almost stopped to talk to them, but I didn't. I just got to my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a while before pulling out. Once I was back in a town, I stopped at a gas station, used the bathroom, bought a drink, and sat in the lot staring at nothing for a long time. Even then, I wasn't totally sure I wasn't overreacting. Maybe he was just some weird loner. Maybe he hadn't meant anything. But the way he looked at me, the way he came back when I'd moved camp, the way he went through my pack without taking anything, It all confirmed what I felt the second I saw him. He was a creep, a dangerous one. That dead-eyed stare wasn't curiosity or confusion. It was calculation, like he was figuring out what he could get away with. I was lucky I trusted my gut. Lucky I didn't wait around for a second visit. If I'd stayed another night, who knows what would have happened. Maybe he would have come back with a different plan. Maybe he would have waited until I was asleep. Maybe he was hoping I'd confront him the first time so he could test how I reacted. I did the right thing. I know that now. Some people can't be reasoned with, and they don't need a reason to hurt someone. They just look for chances. I haven't been camping alone since. I want to go again. I miss the quiet, the stillness, but now I only go with friends, and I pick places where other hikers pass through. I bring better gear now, a GPS beacon, even a trail cam sometimes just to see what passes by at night. I trust my instincts, even if it feels awkward or paranoid, especially then, because in the woods, far from help, there's no room for polite doubt. You only get one mistake, and when someone's reaction confirms everything you were worried about, you listen. You pack up. You get out. You don't wait around to give them a second chance. I took my daughter camping because she loves it. That's really all there is to it. She's 12 now, that in-between age where she still likes to do things with me, but not for much longer. I can feel it slipping little by little every month. So when she said she wanted to go camping just the two of us, how could I say no? We'd gone a few times before when she was younger, but never just the two of us and never this far out. I did my homework, checked maps, read recent trail reports, scouted a location with good reviews and low traffic but not too remote. We settled on a state park in the north part of the state. I made a reservation for a designated backcountry site that required a few miles of hiking to reach. No car access, no running water, no cell signal. That was the whole point. Get away from people, unplug, just spend time together. Marshmallows, stories, stars, laughing about bugs and raccoons. That kind of trip. I double-checked all our gear the day before we left. Tent, sleeping bags, pads, food, filter, bear hang rope, stove, 2 small propane canisters, rainfly, emergency radio, first aid kit. Even packed one of those tiny keychain alarms just for extra safety. Not that I expected to need it, but I believe in being ready. The drive up was easy. Clear skies, a little hot, but manageable. We stopped for lunch halfway and talked about the things we do when we got to camp. She wanted to help pitch the tent, wanted to try using the filter pump on the creek, wanted to make her own foil pouch dinner on the campfire. She smiled the whole time. She was excited in the way only a kid can be, and I was glad to be doing it right, giving her something to remember. We hit the trail in the late afternoon. The site was a little over 3 miles in, just far enough that most casual campers wouldn't bother. The trail was well maintained, dry, and quiet. We passed one group coming out. 3 guys in their 20s who nodded at us but didn't stop. That was it. No one else. By the time we reached the site, the sun was lower in the sky and the shadows were stretching out. The clearing was just off the trail, about 30 yards in, with tall pines on 3 sides and a shallow stream behind it. It was perfect. Flat, dry, with a nice fire ring and a tree with solid limbs for the food bag. We set up fast. She really did help with the tent and got water from the stream. She pumped it herself, proud of every squeeze. We made dinner as it got dark, ate sitting on a log near the fire, and roasted marshmallows after. It was one of those nights that feels like it should be part of a memory you can look back on when things get hard. She pointed out constellations she remembered from a science unit. We saw fireflies. I told her a story from when I was a kid. We laughed until her stomach hurt. She went to bed warm, full, and happy. I sat by the fire a little longer, cleaning up and soaking in the silence. Later, when I zipped into the tent and settled onto my pad, I remember feeling like I'd done something right. Not something big or flashy, just right. The kind of right that you can only earn quietly. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. There was no sound, no obvious reason. But something was off. The tent was stuffy. My back hurt. My brain was half awake and stuck in that place where dreams bleed into real life. I sat up, rubbed my face, and looked around. She was still asleep, rolled onto her side, breathing softly. Her sleeping bag moved slightly with each breath. I listened for a minute, thinking maybe some animal had come close and I'd sensed it, but I didn't hear anything. Still, I unzipped the bag slowly, slid my legs out, and crawled forward to peek out of the tent flap. It was dark, but not pitch black. The moon was out, and the tree cover was thin enough that I could see the outline of our camp. Everything looked the same. Fire pit cold, food bag still hanging. Nothing moved, but I stayed there watching, and then I saw it. Person, standing just at the edge of the trees, maybe 25 feet from the tent. Not moving, just standing there, facing the tent. Arms at their sides. No flashlight, no gear, no sound. I didn't breathe for a second. My hand was already reaching for the knife I kept beside my pad. My thoughts ran wild. Was it a ranger? A lost hiker? No, it wasn't right. Rangers don't sneak around in the dark. Lost hikers call out. This person was standing dead still, like they were waiting. I didn't move. I didn't want to wake her. Didn't want to make a sound. I just watched. After what felt like forever, the figure turned slowly and walked back into the trees. Not fast, not scared, just disappeared, like they'd gotten what they came to see. I waited 10 more minutes before moving. Then I reached over and shook her gently, whispering her name. She groaned, half awake, and I told her to get her shoes on. She didn't ask why. I think she heard something in my voice that told her not to argue. We moved fast. I packed our bags in under 5 minutes, left the tent, left the food, just grabbed what we needed and moved. I had a headlamp, but I didn't turn it on right away. I didn't want to make a beacon out of us. We made it back to the trail and started hiking out in the dark. I had her walk directly in front of me. I kept looking behind us. Every sound made my stomach knot. A branch snapping, leaves moving, the distant hoot of an owl. Every one of them could have been someone following us. I didn't know. I just kept moving. She didn't say a word the whole time. She knew something was wrong. The trail felt 10 times longer in the dark. We tripped a few times, stumbled on rocks, scratched ourselves on branches. I didn't care. I just wanted distance. When we finally saw the small gravel parking area come into view, my shoulders dropped for the first time in over an hour. The car was untouched. I unlocked it, got her in, threw the bags in the back, and drove. We didn't speak until we hit a gas station 40 miles down the road. I told her I thought someone was watching the camp, that we weren't safe there, that she did the right thing by staying calm. She nodded, quiet, then asked if she could have a snack. I bought her 2 bags of chips and a soda and let her eat them in the car. Later, I called the ranger station and told them what happened. Gave them our campsite number, the time we left, and what I saw. They said they'd check it out. That was all. I never heard back. In the weeks after, I kept thinking about it, replaying the image of that person just standing there, silent, like it wasn't their first time. I tried to come up with other explanations. Maybe someone got lost, maybe someone else reserved the site and showed up late, but none of them held up. Nobody hikes 3 miles into a backcountry site with no flashlight or gear and just stands there without calling out. Nobody walks off calmly into the woods after being spotted unless they weren't worried about being seen. They knew we were there. They probably watched us earlier, saw a man and a young girl set up camp alone. Maybe they waited. Maybe they planned to come back later. I don't know what they wanted, but I know it wasn't good. That's what eats at me the most. Because God damn it, I have a daughter who loves to camp. She still talks about it, still asks when we can go again. But now there's always a hesitation in her voice, like she remembers that night in the dark, walking fast, not knowing why, just knowing it was bad. I hate that I had to show her that part of the world so soon, that there are people out there who ruin things just by being the way they are. People who look at a peaceful camp and don't see a father and daughter making memories. They see something else, something to take. We'll go camping again. We will, but not like before, not so far out, not without extra precautions, and not without someone knowing exactly where we are and when we'll be back. Because the world's full of good things, good places, and good people. But it only takes one shithead to turn something beautiful into a nightmare. Just one. And I'll never let her feel that helpless again. Not if I can help it. Not ever. It was supposed to be a simple solo weekend. I needed to get out of the house, away from the constant noise, screens, messages, traffic, people. Life had started feeling like static. Just this low hum of stress and pressure that never shut off. So I packed up and went camping. I've always liked being out in the woods. I've done it since I was a teenager. Nothing fancy, just car camping, sometimes hiking in a little bit to find a good quiet site. This time I picked a spot in a national forest I'd been to once before, a little more out of the way than usual, but not deep wilderness or anything. Just quiet. I got there late in the afternoon. The road in was rough, gravel and dirt for the last couple miles, but I'd scoped it on the map and had it saved offline. The campsite wasn't marked, just one of those clearings you find off an old logging road that people use again and again. Fire ring made of rocks, flat spot under some trees, a short path leading down to a creek. You wouldn't see it from the road unless you were looking for it. That's what I wanted. There was one other car parked about 50 yards away when I pulled in. Older sedan, dusty, parked at the end of the dirt lot. I didn't see anyone around. No movement. I figured they were out on a hike or maybe fishing somewhere downstream. Nothing weird about that. I set up my tent near the tree line, not too close to the creek in case of bugs. Got everything squared away. Food in the car, sleeping bag unrolled, water filter ready to go. The weather was decent. A little warm but dry, no wind, no sign of storms. As the sun started to drop, I built a small fire. Not for cooking. I'd eaten before I got there, just for light and comfort. I sat by it for a while, just listening to the woods. The wind through the trees, distant birds, nothing else. No motors, no voices. Exactly what I needed. It was about 30 minutes after sunset when I noticed a light. Not a fire. Something sharper, colder. A flashlight or maybe a lantern. It was coming from the direction of that other car, back near the path leading out to the road. I figured whoever it was had come back and was getting set up for the night. I didn't think anything of it. The light bobbed a little as it moved, like someone walking. Then it stopped. For a long time, it just stayed still, pointed in the direction of my camp, but not directly at me. Just aimed this way. I watched it for a while. The fire crackled behind me, and I could hear the creek just faintly, but the woods were dead quiet otherwise. After a few minutes, the light moved again. This time closer. Not fast, not stumbling, just deliberate. Whoever it was came about halfway between the road and my camp, then stopped again. The beam of light flicked around a little, then settled straight at my camp. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I stood up and stepped a little closer to my fire. Not sure why. Just instinct, maybe. I didn't call out. I didn't want to break the quiet unless I had to. I just stood there, staring at that light. It moved again. Not closer, but sideways off the path into the trees a bit. Then it shut off. Total darkness. I waited. No movement. No sound. No more light. 10 minutes passed. I stood still, heart ticking faster now. I told myself maybe they were just finding a spot to set up camp. Maybe they were drunk, or high, or just strange. But I couldn't shake the way that light had aimed straight at me. The way it had stopped, moved, stopped again. The way it had gone dark so suddenly. No fade, just gone. Eventually, I told myself to let it go. I didn't want to ruin my night by fixating. I sat back down, poked the fire, added another small log, and tried to enjoy the warmth. Still no sound from that direction. I told myself I'd sleep light and keep my headlamp close, just in case. That's all I could do. An hour later, I killed the fire, crawled into the tent, zipped it up, and got into my bag. I didn't fall asleep right away. I just laid there listening. The air was cool but not cold. My pad was comfortable enough. I stared at the top of the tent, watching the faint outlines of branches above through the mesh. Then I heard something. Not loud, just a soft rustle. Off to the side, like footsteps. Not a deer, not heavy, just slow movement through the leaves. I stopped breathing for a second, reached slowly for my headlamp and held it in my hand without turning it on. Another sound, closer, a crack of a twig, then silence. I turned the headlamp on and unzipped the tent fast, stuck my head out and aimed the light toward the trees. Nothing. I stood up, heart thudding, and turned in a slow circle, scanned the brush, the trail, the path toward the other car. The woods looked normal, still, silent. Then I saw him. He was crouched about 20 feet away behind a tree, just the edge of his face visible from the light. He ducked back immediately when I hit him with the beam. I yelled, loud, just instinct. One hard, sharp shout. Not a word, just noise. He ran, back the way he came, toward the direction of the other car. I kept the light aimed that way, yelling again, louder. Something ugly boiled up inside me. Fear, anger, something that felt like a warning coming out of my throat. My pulse was hammering. The man didn't say a word, just ran back through the brush. I heard him trample the leaves, then saw his light snap on again. A bright, blinding lantern or floodlight from his tent, aimed directly toward me. He didn't come out, just sat there. I couldn't see him anymore, just that light blasting my direction, like a wall. I stood frozen for a few seconds. Then I moved fast, threw my bag in the car, grabbed only what I could carry in one trip, left the tent, left the fire ring, didn't care, started the engine and backed out fast, tires spinning a little on the gravel. I drove fast, bumping over the rocks, heart still beating out of rhythm. The rearview mirror was useless in the dark. I didn't stop until I was back on paved road with signal. Pulled into a gas station parking lot, sat there under the lights, and just breathed for a while. Everything hit me at once, what I'd seen, what could have happened if I hadn't woken up, or if I'd stayed in the tent, or if I hadn't yelled. The reality of how alone I'd been out there. No one nearby, no help, just me and some man crouching near my tent in the dark. I didn't call the cops. I didn't even know if it would have helped. I didn't have a plate number or a name. I just wanted to be away from that place. The next day, I went back in daylight with a friend and a second car. We found my tent slashed. Not destroyed, but deliberately cut. One side of the rainfly torn, one of the poles broken. Not animal damage, not weather. Someone had done it on purpose. Nothing else was touched. The fire ring was cold. The rest of the gear was untouched. But that one act, that damage, felt like a message. Like whoever it was had come back after I left. Had time, had the interest, wanted to leave a mark. We didn't stay long, packed everything and left. After that, I didn't camp for a long time. It wasn't the woods that scared me. It wasn't the dark or the animals or the weather. It was the people. It was knowing that someone could watch you quietly and make a decision about what they want to do while you sleep. That someone could crouch just outside your line of sight, waiting. What stuck with me most wasn't even the sight of him, crouched near my tent. It was that light, that floodlight from his tent turned full blast toward mine. Like he wanted me to see it, like he wanted me to know he was there, not hiding, not scared, just watching back. People asked how I could leave so fast. If I yelled, if I called for help. I yelled the second I saw him. I yelled like my life depended on it because maybe it did. I saw him run, saw him turn on that light, and I got out. That's how. I've camped since then, but differently. Never alone. Always closer to people, ironically. I used to want the isolation, the peace. Now I understand that people are the risk and the safety both. The scariest things don't howl or growl or crawl on four legs. They walk upright. They drive old sedans. They carry lanterns. They sit quietly outside your tent at night and wait to see what you'll do. And you don't forget that once you've seen it. You don't forget how close it got, how bad it could have gone, how fast things can shift from peaceful to terrifying in a place where no one's coming to help. I still love the woods, but I don't trust the quiet anymore. Not completely, not the way I used to, and I'll never sleep with both ears covered again. Not for the rest of my life. It started with a simple plan. take a few days off and go camping somewhere quiet. I had some time saved up at work, and I'd been feeling stretched thin. Not anything dramatic, just that low buzz of being worn down over time. I didn't need company. I didn't want distractions. I just wanted silence, trees, and no cell service. Something about disconnecting has always helped me reset. I chose a state forest I'd never been to before. I looked it up online, checked the maps, found a few dispersed camping areas that were free and didn't require a reservation. There were a couple scattered parking areas where you could leave your car and then hike in a mile or two to set up wherever you wanted. That was the draw for me. Not a campground with picnic tables and RVs, but real woods. I left on a Thursday morning. Figured if I beat the weekend crowd, I'd have more space to myself. It was about a 4-hour drive out of the city, and I stopped once along the way to top off gas and pick up some food. The roads got thinner and more cracked the closer I got, and by the time I reached the forest boundary, I'd been on gravel for over 30 minutes. There wasn't another car in sight. I parked at a small pull-off lot that could probably fit 5 cars. Mine was the only one. A faded wooden sign said Hollow Pines Trailhead. The air was cooler than expected for midsummer. That was fine. I packed light, just enough for a couple nights: tent, sleeping pad, food in a bear canister, water filter, extra clothes. I strapped it all in place and locked the car. The trailhead itself wasn't well maintained. Overgrown on the sides. Some old logs fallen across it in spots. But it was marked, and after the first half mile, it leveled out and opened up a bit. The trees were mostly tall pines and some kind of fir, straight trunks, high branches, dry forest floor. I didn't see a single person. No hikers, no dogs, nothing. Just woods. Exactly what I wanted. I hiked about 2 miles in before I stopped. Found a small clearing off the main trail, mostly flat, with a few large boulders on one side and a slope down toward what sounded like a dry creek bed. I could hear faint birds in the distance. Some insects, not much else. I took my time setting up. Tent went up easily. Bag unrolled. Filtered some water from a small stagnant pool nearby. Not ideal, but with tablets and a backup filter, it was fine. I ate a sandwich I'd brought from the gas station, walked around a bit, stretched. No reception, which was expected. I shut my phone off to save battery and left it in the tent. As the sun dropped, the air got even cooler. I built a small fire using dry pine needles and sticks. Sat by it and just stared for a while. You'd be surprised how fast your mind slows down when there's no screens, no traffic, no background noise. The only sound was the occasional rustle of wind through the trees and the light crackle of the fire. It was around 9:30 when I decided to turn in. The fire was dying down, and the forest had gone still. I put the embers out with filtered water and a good stir of dirt, zipped up the tent, and got into my bag. I lay there listening, and that's when I started to feel something I couldn't put into words at first. Not fear, not exactly, just off. I told myself it was normal. My body wasn't used to the silence yet. Back home, there's always some hum. Fridges, cars outside, the neighbor's TV. Out here, it was real silence. That kind of deep quiet where your ears start to ring because there's nothing else for them to do. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up maybe an hour later. No idea what time it was. My phone was off and my watch was still in my pack. But it was full dark outside. I could feel the cold more now. I shifted in my bag and then froze. There was a sound outside. Not an animal. Not something brushing leaves or scurrying. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. On pine needles. Soft but clear. Close. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I listened. The steps paused. Then started again. Circling. Not right around the tent, but within maybe 20 feet. Close enough. It didn't make sense. There were no other cars. I hadn't seen anyone all day. I was 2 miles from the road, off trail. I hadn't even left much of a path behind me. I stayed still. My bag was zipped up tight, and I knew if I moved too fast, whoever or whatever was out there might hear it. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. A metallic click. It was quick, faint, but unmistakable, like a zipper, or maybe something like a folding knife being opened. I didn't want to believe that, but that's exactly what it sounded like. Then silence. Long, long silence. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached slowly for the flashlight beside my bag. I clicked it on and unzipped the tent in one motion, blasting the light outward in a wide arc. Nothing, just trees, brush, the faint white gray of dead pine needles. I got out of the tent slowly, light aimed out. Did a full 360. My heart was pounding, but I saw nothing. No figures, no shadows, no sound. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, holding the light, scanning every direction. Then I backed into the tent, zipped it up again, and left the light on. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, half sitting, flashlight still in hand, until the sky started to lighten. When dawn came, I stepped out again. This time I looked closer. I walked the perimeter of the camp, looked for tracks, looked for anything that might explain what I heard. And I found something. About 15 feet from the tent, just past one of the larger boulders, the pine needles were disturbed. Not a full footprint, but enough of a scuff to show something had passed through. Too heavy for a raccoon or deer, too clean for wind. Just a small trail of compressed needles, leading toward the back of my tent, and then away again. I packed up in 10 minutes. Didn't even eat. Tent got stuffed down, bag half rolled. I didn't care. I just wanted out. The hike back was fast. I kept turning around, scanning the trees behind me. Every sound made me twitch. Every branch shift felt like someone watching. But nothing happened. No movement. No more sounds. Just the same silent woods. When I got back to the car, I locked the doors immediately and sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, just breathing. I checked my phone. Full bars again. No messages. No alerts. Nothing to say the world had changed while I was gone. On the drive home, I kept replaying it. The steps, the pause, that sound. I know what I heard. It wasn't my imagination. I wasn't dreaming. And I know I wasn't followed, at least not the whole way out. But someone else had been out there that night. Someone who didn't say anything. Someone who got that close without being noticed. I told a few people after I got back. Some believed me. Some said maybe it was just a hunter or a hiker passing by. But that doesn't make sense. No one hikes at night without a light, and no one camps without gear. I saw no signs, no other sights, no fire, no sounds of setup, nothing, just someone walking circles near my tent. That night shook me in a way I didn't expect. I've camped for years. I've heard animals, seen storms, dealt with broken gear, but that was different. That was human. That was intentional. Whoever it was didn't need to say anything. They didn't need to break in or attack. They just had to let me know they were there, that they could be close without me knowing, that they could reach me if they wanted to. And that's what stayed with me. I've gone back into the woods since then, but never alone, and never without a backup plan. I check for service before I lose it. I bring a trail camera. I set up trip lines with string and bells. Nothing fancy, just enough to give me warning. That feeling of being watched, of not being alone when you should be, it doesn't leave. Not fully. And every time I hear a branch snap, every time the forest goes too quiet, I remember that sound, that metallic click, the kind that only comes from a blade being opened. I've always loved the woods. I grew up hunting, fishing, and camping with my father, and as I got older, those quiet weekends in the forest became more than just hobbies. They became necessary. I've done my share of backpacking. I know how to read maps, follow a compass, start fires, and make do with what I carry on my back. I'm not new to this, and I'm not easily rattled, but I'm also a realist. I know how people can be. That's the part that gets to me sometimes. I'm a big guy, over 6 feet, broad, strong, not someone who gets messed with often. I carry a firearm when I go deep into the woods, not because I'm worried about bears or coyotes, but because I've seen enough out there to know that the only thing worse than the wild is someone who knows how to hide in it. That trip I took last fall was supposed to be a solo getaway, just a quick weekend to clear my head. I'd had a rough few weeks at work, and I needed the kind of silence only the forest could offer. I planned to leave on a Friday afternoon and come back late Sunday. No cell service, no contact, just me, a tent, some gear, and a bit of bourbon by the fire under a cold sky. I chose a spot in a national forest about 5 hours from home. It wasn't one of the big parks with rangers patrolling and campsites every 100 yards. It was one of those deep, unregulated areas with long, winding dirt roads and plenty of space for dispersed camping. I'd been there once before, years ago, and remembered it being quiet and hard to find. Just what I was looking for. I left around noon and got to the forest just as the sun was starting to dip. It was late October, so the light faded fast. The access road was rough, all ruts and gravel, but my truck handled it fine. After a few turns and some slow miles, I found a pull-off I remembered. Flat, a little overgrown, and far enough from the main track that I wouldn't be spotted unless someone was looking. I parked, got out, stretched, and took a long breath. The air was cold and dry. The trees had mostly dropped their leaves, but the ones that clung on were bright red and orange. There was no wind, no sound, just the sharp smell of earth and bark and moss. I felt good, grounded, like I'd made the right choice. I set up quickly, tent first, then unpacked my gear into neat piles. I had a small stove, a few dry meals, a thick sleeping pad, and a good bag rated for the cold. I gathered some dead wood from nearby and started a fire in the stone ring someone had built before me. By the time the flames were strong, it was fully dark. The kind of dark you don't see near towns. A deep, black, all-consuming dark. I cooked, ate, and sipped some whiskey by the fire. After a while, I put the fire low and just sat there listening. A few owls in the distance, twigs snapping now and then from small animals, but mostly silence. The kind of silence you don't appreciate until you've lived with noise for too long. I turned in early. I keep things tight when I sleep. My pistol tucked into a side pocket by my head, boots by the door flap, headlamp around my neck. It wasn't paranoia. It was habit. I've always done that, whether I'm 5 miles into the backcountry or 50. Just how I am. I slept hard for a while. Woke up once or twice from the cold, normal, but nothing out of the ordinary. I remember hearing something around 4 in the morning, like leaves crunching, but it was faint and didn't stick in my mind. Could have been a squirrel or something rustling nearby. Either way, I went back to sleep. The next day, I hiked a few miles up an old game trail, saw some deer, cooked a late lunch, and relaxed back at camp. No sign of anyone else. No tire tracks, no footprints but mine. I liked it that way. That night, I made a bigger fire, poured a little more bourbon than the night before, and let myself enjoy it. The kind of peacefulness you don't get when you're always looking over your shoulder. But that didn't last. It was close to midnight when I heard the first real noise. Not a twig, not a gust of wind. This was different. It was the sound of an engine. Faint at first, maybe a mile or more down the road. I killed the fire right away and walked to the edge of my camp where the trees thinned out toward the track. I crouched there and listened. A single vehicle, slow moving. Big engine, maybe a truck or SUV. Not fast, not speeding. Just crawling along like someone looking for something. I waited and watched. After about 10 minutes, I saw headlights. I knelt behind a tree, barely breathing, and watched as the lights swept through the woods, bouncing as the vehicle hit the ruts in the road. Then they stopped. Not all the way down the road. Not where I was. Just stopped maybe 200 yards out. The engine idled for a while. Then it cut off. No doors. No voices. Just silence again. I stayed crouched behind that tree for a long time. Nothing happened. No lights. No sound. I didn't move. I didn't want to shine my headlamp or do anything to give away my position. I just waited, trying to figure out if I was overreacting. Maybe it was someone else camping. Maybe they stopped for the night. But then, maybe an hour later, I heard something. Footsteps. Not fast. Not clumsy. Careful. Deliberate. And close. Not animal steps either. These were human. Someone walking through the leaves and sticks, not trying to be loud, but not trained to be quiet either. Maybe 30 yards from my tent. Then closer. I moved slowly and back toward my truck. My keys were in my jacket, which was inside the tent, but I wasn't going to crawl in there. I reached for my pistol and stood behind a tree, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't see anything in the dark. Just pitch black. No moon that night, but the footsteps kept coming. Closer. Then they stopped. It was dead quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a strange sound, like metal clicking softly. Not a weapon, not a tool, just a click. Then, from across the dark, a bright white light snapped on. One of those heavy-duty flashlights, the kind that runs on D-cells and can blind you in an instant. The beam didn't sweep or move. It just shone right at my tent. Not my direction, just the tent. Then nothing, just the light. I waited, heart pounding, trying to decide whether to shout or run or shoot or wait. I didn't do any of those things right away. I just stood there behind the tree, pistol drawn, watching that beam of light. After maybe 20 seconds, the light turned off. I heard the same footsteps again, retreating, crunching through the leaves, back toward the road. Still no talking, still no engine, just footsteps, then silence again. I didn't sleep. I stood by the tree until my legs ached. Then I crouched. I waited until the first bit of light touched the tops of the trees. Then I broke down my tent in minutes flat. Didn't eat, didn't repack carefully. I just shoved everything into the truck bed, climbed in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I drove out as fast as I could without wrecking my suspension. I didn't look back. When I hit the main road, I stopped at a gas station, went inside to use the bathroom, and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror for a while, trying to figure out what the hell that had been. I still don't know. Could have been someone else camping. Someone who saw a tent and got curious. But they didn't act like someone who wanted to say hello. They didn't call out. They didn't shine a light to guide their own way. They pointed it directly at the tent like they were looking for someone or something. They didn't use the road like a camper would. They stopped early, walked the rest. They tried to be quiet, but not careful enough. They stayed just long enough to be seen, then disappeared. And they didn't know I wasn't inside that tent. If I'd been in there, lying down, asleep, unarmed, I don't know what would have happened. I don't think I want to know. Now, I still go camping. I still spend time in the woods. But I don't go alone anymore. And I don't go unprepared. Not because I'm afraid of bears. Not because I'm afraid of the cold. But because the only thing in the woods that scares me now walks on two legs and wears shoes and knows how to stay quiet. I went camping in Ginny Springs in Florida about 10 years ago. I still remember almost everything from that trip, mostly because of what happened in the middle of the night. I had gone out there with a couple of friends, but we each brought our own tents. It was one of those loosely organized group trips. Someone throws the idea out there and 5 or 6 people show up, but there's no real planning beyond the basic idea of camping for a few days. The plan was simple. Show up Friday morning, spend the weekend floating in the spring, drinking a few beers, cooking over a fire, then pack it all up and head back home Sunday. Ginny Springs had a bit of a reputation for being a party campground. The kind of place you go when you want to hang out with people your own age, maybe meet some strangers and talk around the fire late into the night. There were people of all kinds around, from college kids in big groups to smaller, quieter couples tucked into shaded corners of the property. We arrived in the morning, found a decent spot not too far from the river, and set up camp. I pitched my tent a little farther off from the others because I liked a bit of personal space, and it gave me some quiet when I wanted it. The spot I picked was under a thick set of trees. Back then, I didn't really think much about where the trees were leaning or what the condition of the branches looked like. I just saw some shade and a relatively flat piece of ground and thought that was good enough. The first day went as planned. We got in the water, floated for hours, and had a good time. That night, we cooked burgers on a portable grill and drank a few beers. There was laughter, a little bit of music playing from someone's portable speaker, and the low murmur of a few dozen conversations all around us. Ginny Springs at night had a life of its own. Voices echoing between the trees, firelight flickering through the leaves, and the constant crackle of someone tending to their campfire. I went to bed close to midnight. It had been a long day, and even though I usually stayed up later, something about the heavy food and long hours in the water made me feel like I could sleep for days. I zipped myself into my tent, got into my sleeping bag, and listened to the distant sounds of the campground fading as I drifted off. I don't know how long I had been asleep when it happened, but I woke up to a sound that made my heart stop. It was that deep, cracking, groaning noise that you only really recognize after the fact. In that first second, I thought maybe it was thunder, or maybe someone had dropped something heavy nearby. But then the noise stretched out, longer and louder. It sounded like something pulling itself apart. It built into this crashing boom that shook the ground under my tent. You don't process something like that in the moment. My heart was racing, but I didn't even sit up. I just lay there staring at the roof of my tent, eyes wide, trying to convince myself it was something harmless. Maybe a log falling in a fire pit, maybe someone playing a prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Trees don't just fall for no reason, but when they do, it's unmistakable. There's a raw violence to it, a tearing that sounds like it's coming from the earth itself. About 10 minutes passed. I hadn't moved. I told myself if there were screams or chaos, I'd hear them, and if everything stayed quiet, maybe it wasn't a big deal. But then I started hearing voices. A lot of them, some loud, some urgent. Not screaming, but the kind of panic talking that only happens when something serious just went down. I unzipped my tent, stepped outside barefoot, and saw the silhouettes of people moving in the dark. Some had flashlights. Others just stood near their fires or tents, looking off in the same direction. That's when I noticed that a tree had come down maybe 30 or 40 feet from where I was sleeping. It had landed right across the tent. My chest tightened. I couldn't make out much in the dark, but I could see the size of the tree. It wasn't some small sapling. This thing had a trunk as thick as a kitchen table, and the upper branches were tangled in other trees around it. People had gathered around the spot, flashlights pointing in every direction. Some were kneeling down near the tent. Others just stood nearby, looking unsure of what to do. I walked over slowly, keeping to the edge of the group. I didn't want to get in the way. As I got closer, I could see the tent better. It was crushed completely. The canvas had been flattened to the ground like someone had driven a truck over it. I saw shoes poking out from under the edge. The kind of thing you notice by accident and then can't look away from. Someone was trying to pull the branches off, but it was clear they weren't going to move much without tools. The tree had come down hard and fast. There wasn't much left of the tent underneath. I didn't know the person inside. No one did, really. A few people mentioned that it was a solo camper, someone who had arrived that afternoon and set up quietly without saying much. Just a small tent, a cooler, and a chair by the fire pit. There was a weird silence around the group, like everyone was waiting for someone else to step up and take control, but no one knew how. A few people started calling 911. Someone said they were going to drive out to the entrance to meet emergency services when they arrived. Took a while, probably 30 or 40 minutes. And then I heard the blades of a helicopter in the distance. The flashing red and white lights came in over the trees, and the downdraft from the rotors kicked up sand and dust across the campsite. The medics came in fast, landing in the clearing near the entrance, and made their way to the fallen tree with a stretcher and equipment in hand. I stayed back, still barefoot, still standing near my tent like I wasn't really part of what was happening. It didn't feel real. One moment I was asleep in the quiet of the woods, and the next, I was standing in the middle of a search and rescue scene lit up by the beam of helicopter lights. They worked fast, trying to lift parts of the tree and clear access to the person inside. But after a few minutes, their posture changed. I could tell from the way the paramedics moved, slower, less frantic. They weren't rushing anymore. That was when it really sunk in. The person in that tent hadn't made it. The tree had crushed them before they even woke up. Just like that, they were gone. Probably never knew what hit them. It was a terrifying thought. After about an hour, the helicopter lifted off again, this time with the body. The police stayed behind for a while, taking statements, writing things down, asking quiet questions. I didn't have much to offer. I told them I'd heard the tree fall, then saw the aftermath, but didn't know the person. The campground changed after that. People were quieter, more subdued. Some started packing up right then and there. The mood had shifted completely. The laughter and music were gone. The fires still burned, but no one sat around them anymore. I went back into my tent eventually. I lay there for the rest of the night, not sleeping. Every creak of the trees above me felt like a warning. Every gust of wind felt like it might bring another one down. I couldn't shake the image of that tent crushed flat, the shoes sticking out, the helplessness of it all. The next morning, I packed my things in silence. So did my friends. We didn't say much, just loaded up our cars and headed out. The ride home was quiet. I stared out the window most of the way, thinking about how random it all was. That person had done nothing wrong. They picked a spot, set up camp, and went to sleep. And that was it. I haven't camped under big trees since. I still go camping sometimes, but I'm a lot more careful now. I look up before I pitch my tent. I check the lean of the trunks, the cracks in the branches. I read about widowmakers, I read about root rot and tree health. I keep my distance from old limbs and weak wood. What shook me the most wasn't just the accident. It was how quiet it all was, how fast it happened, how one normal night turned into something permanent for someone else. It was a reminder that nature doesn't care if you're ready or not. It doesn't wait, and sometimes it takes without warning. I still think about that camper sometimes. I didn't know their name, didn't know where they came from, or what they were doing out there alone. But I think about how easy it is to assume you're safe because you're in a park, because there are people around, because the trees have stood for decades without falling. But all it takes is one weak root, one heavy wind, 1 minute of bad timing. That was the night I really understood that when you're camping, your biggest threat isn't always an animal or a stranger. It's the world around you, just doing what it does, quietly, suddenly, and without mercy. The journey back to the campground was tense. The woman continued to mutter to herself, her words a jumble of nonsensical phrases and occasional